Recording in progress. Hi, everybody. This is the Gestalt Get-Together, a speech therapy PD podcast about Gestalt processing, the autistic neurotype, musical language, and so much more. And tonight's episode is all about the more. Now, if you are here for the live recording, thanks for joining. Make sure you get your CEU credit by heading over to Speech Therapy PD to complete the quiz by the end of the day. If you need CEUs and you're not a part of Speech Therapy PD, what are you doing? Really cool thing is that if you want to get this episode for free, you're listening later, you're already here. You can get credit. Use my code Gestalt33. This episode will be for free. Let's get to the good part though. Speech therapists. Working with caregivers is critical in our role. However, our training rarely provides what we need to confidently encounter the emotional experiences of parents and other caregivers. Grief, stress, burnout, confusion, dysregulation, and feelings of defeat are common in parents of neurodivergent children. This course, I hope, will help SLPs learn about a modality of psychotherapy that may be helpful for families who are raising a neurodivergent kid, and maybe even for some therapists listening, especially because it centers a really important tenet of GLP work, which is emotional regulation. I'm thrilled to have my guest, who's Courtney Katzenberg, a psychotherapist at B Psychotherapy in Baltimore, Maryland. She joined the practice in 2021 after a career transition from the field of education, which left her seeking a clinical internship that would allow her to employ compassionate and mindfulness-focused modalities with the perinatal population. In 2024, she pursued training with the Compassionate Mind Foundation to build her knowledge and skills employing compassion-focused therapy, which she uses with individuals and couples. I'm looking forward to learning a lot about compassion-focused therapy this evening. And with that, welcome to the podcast, Courtney.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
I'm looking forward to learning more. I want to ask, my first question is, what does being a psychotherapist mean to you?
Um, It means to me to get to see like the most beautiful, authentic, real parts of human beings. And I feel like I have an imaginary coat rack at my door, and they just kind of take off all the defenses and all the things that kind of the armor people need to go out in the world and get to just kind of hang it up for a little bit. And the goal is that maybe when they leave, they don't have, they can leave a layer or learn that they can kind of move through the world without all of it.
It's beautiful. It's powerful. So you did this training in 2024, Compassionate Mind Foundation, and it seems like your niche is compassion focused therapy. How did your life funnel into this niche? How'd you get here?
Thank you. Yes, it was a journey. And in some ways, like I recently did in a special interest group, they asked the question, which was funny at first, and then it felt so real. They said like life before compassion and life after. And it really was like I could name almost this like very specific moment. I could think back at little points in life where I was like, oh, that was compassion, but to like really have it be like this kind of mindset and motivation. So one of the things I say that actually got me into compassion was I was had been a teacher, decided that I had been giving out, which is funny, the flows of compassion, giving out all my compassion to my students and like didn't have anything left for my own daughter. So I ended up staying home and I was home for a couple of years. And then I decided I wanted to switch and, pursue psychology. And one of the thoughts I had was like, and I recognize 35 is not old. In the moment, I thought it was. And I was like, how could I just like switch careers? And I said, if my daughters came to me at 35 and are like, but this is what I know I'd want to do, I would have told them in a heartbeat, like, you should do this. And so I'm like, if I could say that to them, like, why can't I say that to myself? And I say sometimes, like, especially as moms, like, what I tell my friend is different than I tell my daughter. Like oftentimes, like I love Chris enough, but she says, like, what would you say to a friend? But I think I have like all people pleasing friends too. And so we'd all be like, well, we wouldn't want to bother anyone. But like my daughter, I'm like, oh no, like go out into the world and like shine your light. And so kind of using that. So that started it. And then I got to grad school and I decided I wanted to do a research project. At first, I wanted to look at like self-esteem in parenting, which was very funny because self-esteem is inherently competitive. I know how, yeah. So that's something that was really interesting to kind of discover. I know how well I'm doing in comparison to you. Like the actual scale, the Rosenberg self-esteem scale that like came out in the 60s. And so it said like right, it really was based on this comparison. And so I wanted to actually alter it to parenting. And so I had a focus group of some friends, some moms, and so I gave them the scale. And we're sitting in my living room, and I had like cleaned up because they were coming. And one of it is like, I know how well I'm doing in comparison to others or to other people. And they're like, yeah, I'm looking around your like really clean living room, and I feel like crap right now because I know mine has toys everywhere. Where just before mine did too. And so that is kind of the opposite of compassion. Compassion is not comparison. It isn't one up or one down. It's like it all makes sense, like based on your background experience, based on what you're going through, like this all makes sense.
This,
Sorry.
no, this is so interesting. I've never, the idea of self-esteem as like a competitive lens, that is so interesting. And it's funny because immediately my brain was like, no, it's not. Like, but it's so interesting. So I just pulled up the self-esteem scale because I want to
Yeah.
make sure that people who are here live have
Hmm.
access to it. And I see the one you mentioned about
Yeah.
like, so I'm able to do things as well as most other people. But then I see there's number one, and let me know if this is
Yeah.
not,
No.
but
Yeah.
number
Yeah.
one says, I feel that I'm a person of worth, at least on an equal plane with others. So it's interesting.
Right.
It's not really about the self.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
And like knowing how our tricky brain is always going to go to it's not going to think of the person usually who like, you actually feel better. It's going to be like who you're, the person you always are like envious of. And so like inherently, so I went back to, and it was funny because my mentor was like, I don't think you want self-esteem. And I was like, oh, I do. He's like, I think you want self-compassion. I was like, no, I don't. And so then I went back and I was like, you're right. I want self-compassion. I was like, but inside, I'm like, how can I be the one studying self-compassion when like, I know I'm not I know I don't know what that is. And so part of CFT talks about like the fears, blocks, and resistance to compassion. And I knew like I had my own blocks to it. Like people had said, like in that moment, you should be compassionate. And I'd be like, okay, but what does that mean? So I knew that it was important. And so I was like, okay, I'll research it. And I looked at it as a buffer to parental burnout. And parental burnout is a concept that came out different than regular burnout because it's not like you get to drive away from the job. Like it is 24/7. And so in 2019, researchers, I think they're based in Belgium, they like kind of came up with this concept and did a 40 country study looking at rates of parental burnout. And they were like, wow, this is a problem because some of the outcomes of parental burnout are like, really not good for children because parents are just so depleted and so they were like, this is a problem. And then the next year in 2020, they redid it after COVID had bit, and they were like, we thought parental burnout was a problem, and now it's really a problem. So, but self-compassion was absolutely in the literature always already said it. And then I actually tried to include another variable that was about like being curious and like wondering about your children's inner states. And it did nothing. But what I came to figure out, especially using a CFT lens, so like higher self-compassion, lower parental burnout, lower self-compassion, higher parental burnout. The reason why being curious, if you're concerned about burnout, doing more is not going to help burnout. If you're not in a state of burnout, then yes, being curious and open to your children's experience. But if you're in burnout, you don't need to do any, like what you need to do is just kind of conserve energy. And so that was what was so interesting to really find out was that, right, it makes sense that that really didn't have any impact on parental, it didn't help parental burnout. And so, yeah.
I'm wondering about, so like, how would you, because I hear like being curious, and that's such a big part of like how when working with GLPs, it's such
Yeah.
a huge part of what we have to do and start with. But can you operationalize more? Like, what does being curious mean? What are those behaviors?
Uh-huh. Well, so reflective functioning is the kind of the variable that I used, and it
Okay.
comes out of attachment literature.
Okay.
But it's this idea of like, I have an inner state and I have motivations and intentions, and my child has an inner world and has motivations and intentions. And so someone who would be kind of lower on reflective functioning would assume that their children's behavior is because of them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it's not due to their own motivations and intentions and goals and hopes and dreams.
Mhm.
And so, like, one of the questions for that scale is like, my child got sick to keep me from doing something.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and that did show up that if people had that, like were low in reflective functioning, did have higher rates of parental burnout. But the
Okay.
opposite of like being curious about your kids' internal states and what are they motivating them and what, while that is so important to like when things are going well to help build that, facilitate that attachment,
Yes.
when we're in those moments of complete exhaustion, that's not what we need to be doing. It's like, how can I make things simpler? Not how can I
Mm.
be doing more?
Hmm.
And so that was something that was really interesting. I liken it to, I kind of had the image of like a tree in winter.
Okay.
Like the tree shouldn't be growing then. Like the tree is just kind of getting through winter. And if it tried to like be growing branches, like that would be using energy it didn't have. Like its goal in that moment is just like, this is a hard season. The conditions are not meant for me to be growing. And so, like, I think of burnout as kind of these moments where just the conditions are hard. There's a lot on our plate. Spring is going to come,
Mm.
but at that moment, like, that is not our goal, is to be growing.
I feel like I'm thinking of several families I've worked with where there's a lot of fear about losing time, especially with a
Uh-huh.
neurodivergent kid, where it's
Yeah.
like every moment counts for development. And I
Right.
just see every therapy
Uh-huh.
every day is booked. They're on the road. I'm families who used to drive over an hour to see me, and I've set a limit about that now, where I'm like, that's not appropriate
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I'm right. It's
Yeah.
that
Right.
amount of like adding on so much
Mm-hmm.
because I coming from like fear, stress. And so
Right.
in situations like that, do you have anything to respond to with like that situation?
Yeah. So, and that really kind of jumps into that idea of the three systems of CFT that
Yeah, let's talk about it.
yeah, so the idea is that we have these three systems, and ECFT is a very much there's kind of different components, but there's this attachment lens, there's like an evolutionary biology lens, it has some kind of Buddhist pullings, and so kind of using an Eastern philosophy, but with our very Western kind of mindset, and then also neurobiology. But so, kind of this idea that our threat system, which is what you were speaking to, anxiety, anger, disgust, things that we don't choose, that are just biologically designed to come online and to come online quickly. Because if we're, we always, Paul Gilbert, the kind of developer of CFT, always uses animals and, the savannah, like the zebra to like hear a rustle and take time to ponder, what it is, like that doesn't keep it safe. So these are all these things to keep us safe. That's the threat system. And then we have also came online as our drive system. And that's the seeking for resources, joy, kind of this kind of drive, like going and getting things. And then as mammals kind of came to be, we had this soothing system because we have, these animals that like come out, very kind of helpless. And so the soothing system is really kind of to help them soothe themselves, grow up, kind of stay safe. And so we have these three systems. Our kind of society is really built on threat and drive. We use drive to get out of threat, but it really actually wasn't designed for that. We're really actually meant to go from threat to soothing, because once we get to soothing, we can go to drive with intention. And so, like, for that example of those parents, like, kind of these therapies are coming out of a place of threat. What if I don't do enough? As opposed to if we stop and pause for just a moment, for as much as we can soothe, what therapy actually seems to be the most effective? Which one is, what really is what we're focused on in this moment? Or, and maybe it is all of them, but it's like we're doing it not out of this like fear of right, but more like with intention. But we have to soothe to be able to kind of get there. My favorite kind of metaphor story of that I read once in a CFT book is, and it's based in England. So like I love how it always has the like all the words are spelled, with a U or whatnot. But it talks about like if you're standing in a pond in your Wellington boots and you're seeking clarity, you're trying to find something. If you start walking around, that's our doing, that's our drive. If we start walking around, we're actually just like making the pond, mucky. We can't see clearly. And so, actually, which is so hard. And I say all of this not like I'm this walking guru of like soothing and just taking deep breaths but like we have to stand, we have to stay still for a moment, let things settle. And so that then we can choose and walk, get to the place where we need to be with more clarity.
Okay, I want to speak through my understanding of the three systems. I'm
Yeah,
very basic and let me
yeah,
know if I'm
yeah,
wrong about this. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
So the threat system that's considered like the oldest system, which makes sense.
yeah.
We talk a lot in our field about just like the amygdala
Right,
and survival
exactly.
mode for kids.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think we often are asking kids to go from threat to drive. You're in you're in a meltdown, you're in a stress response. Go to your talker and hit the button for I need a break.
Mm-hmm.
Say I'm finished, say I'm angry. That's right to the drive rather than to the soothing system. Okay, so threat activates
Mm-hmm.
um the messages we get from society and others tell us to go into drive, or like, yeah, I guess the internalization of it. We should be going to soothing so
Mm-hmm.
that then we have the clarity and resources to get to drive.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah.
it? Okay.
Yeah, and they overlap. So it's not like, there's times where like there's a really cool app and I can share the link called My Three Circles. And you can literally like pull how big your circle is in that moment, and so it kind of it's this idea, and this is where and so drive also feels good. So it makes sense when we don't have our soothing system online and it is one most of CFT therapy is usually building up the soothing system because soothing allows us to meet threat at a different place. And so we don't, and one of the things recently, I love it because I'm always learning, but Paul Gilbert was saying is like, we don't soothe, we don't take our deep breaths to just like, you know, go into this like comatose state. We actually soothe so that we can meet our anger with compassion as opposed to like running away from our anger. It's kind of like, okay, what can you tell me? And I'm in a place that I can hear it, as opposed to like, I'm going to drive away from it. I'm just going to avoid it. I'm just going to, it's like, how can I meet it? These threat system, like, are these threat responses? And because they have information for us, but like, with that kind of more clear openness and curiosity, kind of those things.
I'm wondering about because I think a lot of listeners they learn well through examples
Yeah,
and anecdotes. Do you have
yeah.
any that come to mind
Yeah,
about these systems and how you work with people?
yeah. So I think, one of it is they're at my office right now, but so I actually there's some like charts that have more, I made my own that just say like threat reacting, drive, drive doing, soothe being. And so part of that, like for example, there's a short little video I'll send to. I have all sorts of little things I send, but there's a really cute little video that was created by someone in Australia. And so I even showed that short little video to my daughters who are 6 and 9. And we'll sometimes like if they're, have a reaction, or I even sometimes have said to them like my red circle, because they color are color coded too. So threat is red, drive is blue, and soothing is green. But I'll be like, my red circle right now is really big. And that's just like a really quick cue to them that it's also not like, it's not your fault. This is my threat. But if we're all in this together, like the flows of compassion, which kind of can go into, but like we can understand, like this reaction isn't like it's not something for you to fix, but also how can you understand? And sometimes I'll say to them, like, is your red circle pretty big right now? And it kind of just brings us present into that moment. And so my clients will like have their little thing up and they'll just be like, oh my gosh, I'm in threat right now. And that's where that emotion regulation really comes in because it's not about, I need to do something. It's more just the aware, like the first step is just awareness of like, what circle am I even in right now? And it's nice, like, as opposed to like a feeling wheel where like I'd be like, what am I feeling? Like, and it's like all these options. It's kind of like, what circle am I in?
Do you feel like that helps people kind of jump back out of the stories that they
Yes.
tell or that they've internalized?
And one of the things that CFT really says, which the first time I heard it, I was like, was it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility.
I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's kind of this idea of like, I didn't choose to go to threat. For example, like with parenting, if I'm a human being and there are times where I will yell at my children. Do I like it? No. But what I'll do is I'll literally like in my head rewind the tape and I'll go back to that moment. I'm like, was there a moment when I said, do you know what I want to do right now? I just want to yell at my children. Like, no, like that never happened. And so that's where that self-compassion can come in and say, like, I didn't choose in that moment to like be the worst version of, myself. But okay, now that I see that, now I can like that kind of brings me to soothing. Soothing is also like this like affiliative system connection. And so now I can do that repair. I can check in with them, have a conversation. And so that's where that kind of, and then do I need to get to drive? But you kind of can see where you can move through it.
You briefly mentioned you said something about flows
Yes.
of,
Yeah.
okay, take us there. What is that?
So the flows of compassion is this idea that we can have and compassion to others, which is like most parents, I would say, are like really good at compassion to others. And so that flows pretty freely. There's the idea of compassion from others. And depending on our relationship to compassion, we might struggle when like someone is trying to give us compassion because we don't want them to think we're weak. We don't want them to think we can't handle it. And so that kind of fears, blocks, and resistance to compassion can really show up there too. And so that is this idea, though, is that like, how do we even allow ourselves to take it in? That it doesn't have to mean that we're incompetent, that we're not good parents. It's just that people want to like, engage with our suffering. And then there's compassion to self, which is self-compassion, but this idea of like, how do I turn it inward? A story of the flows of compassion is this summer I was I was at the pool, which is like, oh my gosh, could that not be like the most vulnerable place one could ever be with. So I'm in my bathing suit with all these other parents, just set up for vulnerability and talking about things. And I just found myself not acting the way I wanted to. I in the moment, I don't think I was in threat. So I wasn't even that much aware of it. And then I got home and I was just like, ugh, the self-criticism kind of came online, like you weren't being kind, kind of this harsh judgment. And then I stopped and I was like, why do you think that kind of was the case? And I was like, well, one, I'm exhausted. Two, it's like right before dinner. Three, I realized the topic they were talking about left me feeling like a little insecure. And so there was someone in the group who I previously had interesting dynamics with that I wasn't always sure. And then I was like, interesting. I wonder if when we've had conversations like these topics have made her feel, made them feel insecure. And then I could like flow that that compassion outward. And it's like the next time I'm in a conversation and someone kind of might be acting the way I was, instead of assuming it's something about me or something about them, what if they're tired? Like, what if they're hungry? And so that's where these kind of flows of compassion can come in.
You use that opener, I wonder. Is that a common prompt in CFT?
So I wonder yes, I wonder definitely. Another one would be like that I use all the time, like, would it make sense?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Would it make sense that you would respond that way, given that you were standing in your bathing suit, tired, like
Mm.
the topic, would that make sense? And so, because CFT talks a lot about, right, like based on our background, our experiences, like no behavior never makes sense really, like given
Mm,
all these pieces.
yeah.
Um, so,
There's so many parallels to working with families
mhm.
where I think about on both levels. It's like, does that make sense for where you're at as a caregiver in this process? But also, if like as therapists, we're speech therapists, analyzing the kid of what we're seeing from them right now. Does this make sense in the context of their environment, their sleep, their like all of that, rather than just saying the story of the impression of the story of it, of like very often good versus bad,
Right.
those
And
two camps. Yeah.
also, right, I'm thinking of also this like black and white of like, well, it says on paper that it should be da 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 da,
Yeah.
like that without any context,
Yeah.
But right, given all these pieces, does this make sense? And right, yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of my favorite things when I'm working with caregivers or even teachers is just like giving a chance. I love the I wonder
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's giving that opening.
Uh-huh.
You're giving an opening and you're showing curiosity about someone else's mind
Yeah.
rather than coming in and being like, here are all the things I think that you need to do and that you need to fix to
Uh-huh.
get, the drive. That is the drive, right?
Yeah.
It's like this to meet those goals. But those openers and those prompts, like, I wonder, that's that curiosity about what's going on in your head related to the experience of having your child.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is, so if you think about it, that I wonder keeps them out of threat. If you come at them and
Huh.
say, duh, 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 there's a
Mm-hmm.
good chance they're immediately going to go to threat. I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
If I was a better caregiver, I would have known that, like just that.
Oh, yeah.
And so instead, this I wonder, so compassion we say is a motivation. So it's not in any one of the circles, but using, if we're motivated by compassion, we move through the circles, we use compassion to help us get where we need to go. And
Mm-hmm.
so that I wonder is helping them find compassion and then choose to go and then help them get to drive and
Yeah.
not have that come back and be like, oh, I'm in threat, like I'm not doing enough.
Yeah.
So,
another one I use, and because I really like coaching conversations, but I'm so curious to get your feedback if maybe how I'm presenting things is limiting. I like asking or saying, I'd really like to know what you think about blank.
Yeah.
You feel
Yeah.
like that lands, or would that be
Yeah.
limiting?
Yeah. Because I think so to me, the like other words for compassion are openness,
Mhm.
curiosity. It's just this idea of keeping the not so narrow. Like and as I all the time say, there isn't one right way to do things.
Mhm.
And so it kind of is keeping things open by asking that question, and coming at them with like this kindness and warmth, and not this kind of like, I know and you
Yeah.
don't. Yeah.
There's a term just popped into my head. I don't know what like modality it comes from, but I want to know if there's a connection. I've heard this term called unconditional positive regard. Is
Hmm.
that related to CFT at all? Is it a different modality?
Yeah, I'd say it definitely is totally because it's kind of this idea that like so compassion, I forgot to give the like official CFT definition,
Yeah.
is compassion is the willingness to engage with suffering with the commitment to alleviate and prevent it.
Can
So,
you say it one more time? Yeah.
so compassion is the willingness to engage with suffering with the commitment to alleviate and prevent it.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it's this idea that it takes courage to engage with suffering. So compassion is not easy. It's not just this like like it's hard sometimes. Suffering is
Mhm.
hard to engage with. But there's like these attributes, like if we come at it with sympathy and empathy and non-judgment, and building our distress tolerance, but that helps us engage with the suffering, both my own suffering, and that's those flows, and other suffering. And
Yeah.
then it takes wisdom to alleviate and prevent it. And that's where we have to get to soothing so that we can use our wisdom to
Mm.
alleviate and prevent it.
Yeah.
And
I'm,
I
yeah.
imagine, and I see this all the time, that people tend to default to one. Like some people kind of get lost in the suffering.
Okay.
And then some want to skip over the suffering and just alleviate and prevent.
Yeah.
And so it's that both. It's that, yeah.
What are the alleviation like behaviors that happen without
So
compassion?
an example that I heard in my training. So let's say that you're in your house and your windows are open and you hear, you're doing some work and you hear a little kid outside crying. And so you go outside, it's your neighbor's kid, they're sitting on the ground and they're crying and like they have, their knees scraped up. So the compassion, how you would alleviate and prevent in that moment is you would bend down, you'd have like a pretty soft, way to you. You'd use like a soothing voice. Are you okay? Can I get you anything? They don't have any broken bones or anything. It's just kind of helping them feel calm, and so that's one. Let's say you go out and they do have a broken bone. Well, I'm not a doctor, so it wouldn't be compassionate if I tried to like fix their broken bone, right? So in that moment, I have to actually I can engage, but I can't alleviate and prevent it because I don't have the skills to do it. The story goes on that it's just the knee, the mom comes out and you invite them over for dinner. And so you're at home and that same little kid goes to your stove and goes to touch the hot pot. Would I in that moment go, "Oh, honey, don't touch that pot right now"? That would not alleviate and prevent compassion. I like would probably spot their hand out and be like, "No," because that would be the compassionate response there. And so that's where compassion is sometimes like it's situation dependent, it's context. But so that's why like having to kind of get out of that threat to like be able to really think through what would. Alleviate and prevent. Yeah.
Okay, and then the wisdom part of it, and stop me if I'm like getting ahead
Yeah.
of anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
How would you define that wisdom component?
So wisdom to me is the alleviate. I need to engage. So the three kind of attributes of compassion is wisdom, courage, and I think like caring commitment. And
Okay.
so those are all like a part of it. But the courage is to, I have a caring commitment is like kind of overall. I have the courage to engage, and I will use my wisdom, my compassionate wisdom, to know how to alleviate and prevent the suffering.
This is so interesting. Wow. And I hope that
Yeah.
I'm interested for like listeners, especially those who are listening live, feel free to put in the chat if anything that Courtney is saying is reminding you of families you work with. If anything that she's describing reminds you of maybe even yourself, your relationship with your own work, your own child. Because I'm hearing parallels from myself and my work
Mhm.
about jumping right to drive, not even considering why would I soothe myself in this moment? Drive is what's going to fix this. So I'm hearing myself in this. I'm really curious if listeners are drawing connections to in their work. Um, so we talked about the three flows of compassion, and these different systems. I'm curious about, and that's another one I do that I'm curious about, that I
That's
wonder, and it's
wonderful.
to your
Yes,
kid,
that's
right?
yeah, yeah.
It's become so automatic at this point. Um, people who are listening to this podcast, a lot of them, they really enjoy theory, they really enjoy the descriptions of these ideas and these frameworks, but they also are really eager to know,
Mhm.
how can I come away from this with one idea? Now, most people listening are not going to be psychotherapists, and so we have to be judicious about how we
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about these things and bring them in. But what are strategies for modeling compassion and cultivating compassion in us?
Uh-huh. Yes. So, this idea of like that accept it, and when I work with parents a lot, it's like, well, what's the right thing to do?
Yes. Okay. Pause there. Right. That is so common. Yeah.
Yes.
What is the right? What's the most? Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yes. And so one of the things I explain is that overthinking is underfeeling. And often the underfeeling is threat. What if I'm not doing it right? What if I make a mistake? And so this kind of idea of like one, I my intention to find the right thing is this idea that I almost, it makes sense because then I don't have to feel like I just feel like I did it right. I don't have to live in this uncertainty of what if I didn't do it right. And so it's almost this acceptance of that there is all sorts of options out there, and that compassion says just taking a step is going to give information. And so I can take that step, and maybe then I continue down that path, or I take a step back, or I take a step to the right. But it's not this I often think of it's like we feel like we're at like the cliff, the top of the cliff, and either like we make the right decision and we get to the other side, or we just like fall down. And so instead, compassion like lifts the ground up, and it says like you might trip, but the ground isn't going to be that far away. If we kind of zoom out, these decisions feel so big in the moment because we care so much. And because our brain goes to worst case scenario, it's designed for safety. And so kind of recognizing like, well, this is my worst case scenario that this would happen. And so like, thank you, brain. Thank you for coming up with that. Like really I like will say like, isn't that interesting? And like clients sometimes will tell me, and I'm like, that's funny because my worst case was different. Like it's funny, right? There isn't, it's what it is for us. And so it's kind of this like, how do we lower our temperature? And so to know that, like, the same way with my kids, like, I can yell, but that doesn't mean that forever I'm like, the worst mom. I can repair. Compassion allows me to not live in this place of threat. It allows me to like step outside it and recognize that, like, because the other thing is that if we go to self-criticism, which is a form of threat, we're not going to be able to then move to soothing and move to that connection.
I was imagining, I love analogies, so I appreciate that you're bringing those in too, about like the edge of the cliff and compassion like raises the ground. Before you said that, I was imagining how compassion also could kind of help you look and see there's many different paths
Yeah.
to go down as well, many different options rather than just like straight off the cliff face.
Right. Right. And that's it's this like, how do we help ourselves see that and part of it is that like it feel like when we're exhausted,
Mhm.
just finding the one right answer feels like a dream because I'm
Mhm.
exhausted. And so it's almost like, how do I also, compassion will also say, I was talking to a client recently. So one of the things I do on my whiteboard is I'll put suffering and then I'll put alleviate and prevent. Like I just put those prompts. So like when they tell me a story, I'm like, okay, what is the suffering? And so the story was, I'm just so exhausted. I'm really exhausted, but can we just spend time today creating systems for like meal prep for the week? And if I just, get that all set up. And I was like, okay. And so she's like, can we spend some time kind of thinking about how I could? And I was like, so what is the suffering? And she's like, well, I don't have the system. So I'm like, that's not the suffering. The suffering
Oh.
is exhaustion. That's where the suffering is. And so I'm like, how do we alleviate and prevent that? She's like, do more. And I'm like, no, it's
Mhm.
not. That does not alleviate and prevent. We need to do less. And one day, maybe you will find this amazing, organization of meal prep. But what our work is right now is how do we tend to ourselves when we do less? How do we find the ways to make things simpler? And there, our tricky brain's going to say, you're not doing enough. Other people can do more if you just found the right thing.
Yeah.
And instead, the work is how do we talk to ourselves and say, like, right now, this is what I can do. And this is the most compassionate, caring thing I could do for myself right now is to not pull from this empty cup and just allow things, find the most simplest way and like take things away as opposed to adding more.
Mm. So I'm thinking about a lot of the clients of families that like we work with in this GLP focused world where it's they get a diagnosis because we think about like the overlap of Gestalt processors and autistic kids. There's
Yeah.
quite a bit of overlap in how we describe them.
Uh-huh.
They get a diagnosis and then it's do 40 hours a week of ABA therapy, OT, PT, speech.
Wow.
There's this huge list of things that in a
Yeah.
threat state, they're then saying, here's your drive.
Right.
And then it's all in.
Right.
And then I think there's kind of this internalized narrative that if we don't do all of those, then it's wrong, then it's bad, something bad's going to happen. And that reminds me so much of these circles. And there's, I can't think of any families like I've worked with where, the doctor was like, and so like, let's like to sit with the feeling to
Yeah.
focus on that
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
getting right to the
Right.
therapies, which
Yeah.
makes sense.
Right.
But conversations I've had with several families about, they're like, oh, we have to do this. And
Ah,
asking them, well, how do you feel about the services you're getting from
yeah.
OT? And they're like, I don't think it's doing anything. Just opening up those doors of, do we really need to be doing all of this? So like, oh, I'm not sure if they're making progress there.
Yeah.
Or just to like start to get curious
Right.
about, you've got all this on your plate. Do you even like how that thing on your plate tastes?
And right. Could you, that idea of like, can you trust yourself enough to know whether you like it or not?
Ooh, okay.
That's also like, but the doctor said, and it's
Mhm.
like, but you giving those parents the confidence to say, but I know
Yeah.
my kid and know the context and I know the pieces, and like building that self-trust is also, and that compassion to say, you know what, I trust myself that in this moment I don't think it's working. And if I find that actually they really need it, then we can add it back on. But that, there isn't just one way to do it, and I can listen to myself.
Mm, listening to yourself. Okay. I
Mhm.
can imagine people being like, I don't even know what that means.
I know.
So
Yeah.
is that tapping into an inner voice? Is that about sensation in the body, locating it? What can that
Yeah.
look like to people?
Yeah. And I think, it kind of depends, but and that's why, which I'm like looking at recently, I was like, well, the problem with soothing. They're like, you didn't tell me there were problems with soothing. I thought all I wanted was soothing. I'm like, well, you do want soothing. But the struggle with soothing is right. You might be standing in the pond, and the thing that comes up is some like, dirty fish. Like it could be something that isn't, the truth of like, I don't think this is really working, or like, I am really sad right now. Like, I have grief about what's going on. I have fears about like, how long is this going to go? And so that's part of the reason why ping-ponging from threat to drive keeps us from having to hear that. But that's also where we learn the self-trust, where we learn to hear what is really coming up for us. And so that's where soothing can be tricky because
Okay.
it opens the door for like our authentic,
Yeah. So we have a we have a guest named Susan who just asked something very interesting, and it
yeah.
taps into the idea of denial. And I'm
Uh-huh.
wondering how that plays in, because is denial like, I guess it wouldn't truly be soothing, even though it might feel like it. So Susan's question
Yeah.
is, how long do you stay or encourage someone to stay in the soothe stage if a parent is in denial of the severity of their child's diagnosis?
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts
And
on that?
so to me, they would still be in threat. So
Ah,
I have another analogy, and I like one day want to make this into a picture. So I imagine a low balance beam. And I say low because it's a compassionate balance beam. And I write this on my board and so down the center is compassion, and on one side is overwhelm, and in one side is avoidance. And so compassion is finding the balance between the two. It's being able to engage with the suffering without becoming overwhelmed, but also not avoiding it either. And so it's almost like, right, we almost like sometimes trying to find our balance, like might actually fluctuate between the two, and the goal being, but then it's also like it's funny, I was talking to my daughters about it this at dinner, but it's like if we're so focused on balancing, we also are like, that's also really hard to do too. It's like, okay, how do I like engage this like compassion and this like knowing that I might kind of sometimes fall off, but like I can get back on. But avoidance to me would still be kind of part of the threat system.
when you're working with um, when you're working with parents
Mhm.
and you think that there might be denial at play as that self-protective mechanism,
Mhm.
what are ways that you help to soften it or help people move in that?
Mhm. That is, I think, so when I come from a different lens, I guess for me the most I would try and just get to soothing, um
Okay.
and stay really curious, and really kind of, where is the suffering? This kind of idea of compassion. And the other thing is, helping them. So like the attributes of CFT is like empathy and sympathy. And, if this was happening to someone else,
Mm.
like the idea of like, we got one of the examples that's great about like sympathy versus empathy. Like if you watch someone like close their finger in the door and be like, right, you're like, ah. But
Yeah, I
then
felt it.
but then if I close my finger, it's like, oh, why were you thinking? Like you always move so fast. And if you just slow down, it's like we don't even have sympathy for ourselves. Uh, and so it's almost like helping parents sometimes build up this kind of compassion so that they can then engage with the suffering.
Okay, I see. Okay, so
Because,
like in the soothing state, it then allows things to maybe move more and be able to
right.
face. Okay.
Yeah, because if they don't have the tools of like that system,
Hmm.
engaging with the suffering is just going to keep them in threat.
Mm.
But it's hard because, right, I know that your role isn't necessarily as much.
Wait, no, but I think this is interesting. That's why I wanted to have you on here because I mean, there's so much of this that we cannot do within our license. We're not qualified to do, and probably would make things worse if we didn't understand it. But I think for a common thing
Hmm.
that we might think or say is like, why won't this parent just, why can't they see? Why don't they? Because there's a complex human being in front of us
Mm.
who's trying to stay safe. And
Yeah,
so I wanted to have you on so that people could hear more about what mechanisms might
mm,
be at play.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's such a beautiful way of
and
saying
it just and to allow us to like the idea of the flows of compassion can we have a healthier flow of compassion to not only the kids we're working with, a lot of the time the focus is just on the kids, but to the really important people who are driving them there, who are dropping them off at school, who are sitting across from them at the IAP meeting holding back tears because they're so scared. um so
it.
this conversation could be a better opportunity to understand those flows and those systems.
Yeah.
um
And it's so helpful to even just say like this person's in threat right now.
yeah.
It like when I've like it just helps me so much. Like I had a really interesting conversation or interaction with someone this weekend and like came off pretty aggressive and it's hard. Like I went into threat myself and then it's like I kind of saw a friend, sat down and just like, it's like they're in threat, like they didn't choose that. And so it just kind of like softens things. Then I can have compassion for them and have like, compassion for myself that, it didn't feel great. But one of the things, and this is kind of off topic, but I'm currently obsessed. It's not off topic, but I'm really obsessed with. So I've gotten into doing a lot of grief work and like studying grief from a CFT lens. And I feel like it really applies to this population. And so the grief, according to Darcy Harris, grief is the shattering of the assumptive world. I know. And so for a lot of parents, like we assume parenting is going to go a certain way. And so when it doesn't, there is the shattering of that. And there's that denial is parents trying to hold on to their assumptive world because our assumptive world it keeps us safe because it's certainty and predictability and so this idea of how do we grief work is really how do you help people rebuild their assumptive world because we kind of just need to get through life that way but incorporating the grief experience and so kind of almost having a bigger assumptive world now.
With grief work, is it about connecting to your body's present moment experience? Because that is, I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but
Yeah.
it's more like being present with like your current sensory reality rather than the projection or the story.
A bit of it's kind of just it's walking alongside,
Okay.
it's kind of whatever comes up for them. And it's
Okay.
like people trying to reorient. Sometimes it is, thoughts, sometimes it's behavior, sometimes it's physical, like, you
Mm.
know, um, but it is this idea of like this kind of the ground is shaking a bit and like, kind of, and so it's just having like it's like companionship. It's just kind of, and giving them the compassion to just however they are in that moment. Um,
Mhm.
but right, like one of the things when I had this interaction this weekend, because I'm obsessed with this concept and I kept telling my friend about it, and I was like, I have a feeling that their assumptive world is that people are not trustworthy. Um, and because kind of I came at this person really excited and I was not greeted with that. But I kind of came to find out that that was actually in line with it. And so it's kind of how we, like, some of the questions of the assumptive world is like, the world is, people are, I am, my future is. Um, and so it's just kind of interesting to see, right, how sometimes when you're interacting with someone, it's like, we all have different assumptive worlds. And it's also not, if I'm grieving and someone actually can't engage, it's almost like I don't want to take that grief into my assumptive world.
Can you say that? Can you explain that a little more? I didn't follow that. I don't want to take that
Yeah.
grief into my assumptive world. Tell me
So,
more
like,
that.
for example, like I have a client who lost a parent at a young age, and there were people who, like, just didn't show up for them. And really, what that was is I don't want to engage the idea that a parent could be lost at a young age. And so if I avoid it, I can keep my assumptive world whole.
Wow.
And so parents sometimes who might not be seeing certain things
Yeah.
are trying to hold on to
Mm.
a certain assumptive world.
That's such an interest. I'm definitely going to take that phrase away, assumptive world.
I can send more articles on that too, because
I think, yeah.
yeah, and it goes also to like a community level and a global level and a country level. Like there are certain things. And I think that's what can be hard too with these parents is that like there's almost a whole community, like parenthood assumptive world. And now
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're on the out group.
That's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really big one, a common experience of like people say, like, I lost all my friends because nobody got it.
Right.
Um,
Uh-huh.
yeah, that's a common one I hear.
And as social creatures to be different or not in the group with everyone else is
Mhm.
just like almost the scariest thing for us.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You mentioned like links and resources. I feel like you're a wealth of those. We had briefly talked about
Yeah.
there's some research about CFT with the populations that I work with.
Yeah.
Anything you want to share about that?
Yeah. I had for a client come across, it's called Aspire in Australia.
Yeah,
And
I've got the link for that to share.
yeah, which is really exciting because it has both like how to provide compassion for parents who are working with their autistic children, but also a whole like kind of little course on building compassion. And it's for adults with autism, but anyone could, I'm sure, benefit from it. And so it's an organization that, unfortunately, it seems like it, and I just don't know if there's something similar here, but I like looked through the website and I was like, oh, there's so many great ideas here. But they do a lot of research, which is cool.
Yeah, I'm seeing. So there's the Aspect Self-Compassion Program for autistic adults. There's the Self-Compassion Program for a clinician version
Hmm.
and Cultivating Self-Compassion as a parent of an autistic child. So they've got the three different options there, which I think is cool to look into if you're listening right now.
Yeah.
Um, and then also, if people are interested, there were some studies that that I found that you also referenced. And I'm going to put some of those citations in the chat right now if anyone wants to look into them. There is one in particular, it's from 2024, so it's pretty recent. It was the effect of group training based on compassion-focused therapy on shame and distress tolerance of mothers of children with autism spectrum disorder. So that's one I'm going to put in the chat if anyone wants to look into that. And, I'm looking at the time right now, Courtney, we're coming up towards the end. So I want to make sure that if anyone has a question that they'd like to pose to Courtney that you think is finite enough to fit into the end of our episode, please do so. But as we're coming to close, Courtney, if there was a main takeaway for our listeners about CFT, what would it be?
I think that as SLPs and as a former educator, like compassion is a skill and it just requires training. And it's not something that like you have or don't have. It is truly like there are different, here is I have many of these books, but this is the Compassionate Mind workbook. And you can see it's big, like it, but it's like all of a sudden to see parents and clients come in and realize that they like met themselves or like their family with compassion and they're like I'm doing it, it's like the most exciting thing. So yeah, I love it.
If people are listening and they want to know where to start learning about CFT, what do you feel like is the best place to go?
So there's the Compassionate Mind Foundation has is kind of Paul Gilbert's kind of home. And so that has some trainings. My current favorite book is Mindful Compassion. But there's also ones I grabbed at, like this is Building Your Self-Confidence with CFT, and they're all kind of walk you through the process. So there are some awesome books. There's podcasts, Compassion and T-shirt by Stan Steindl. And he has a ton of episodes with all different topics that you can always find one that's interesting. So
Great. Well, there's certainly a lot to take away from this. I love conversations where I have no idea what to say next, and I just do like the sound. This is an episode I'm gonna like listen back to in the car. I don't like listening to myself, but I have to listen to this one again. Courtney, thank you so much. This was fantastic. And then just on the logistical side, for those of you who are here live, please make sure you get credit for this continuing education hour. You're going to go back to your account on Speech Therapy PD, take the quiz so that in December, you're not panicking to get all of your hours. Thank you so much, Courtney, for joining. I really, really appreciate your time and your wisdom and your compassion. Thank you, everybody. We will be back here again in 2 weeks. This has been the Gestalt Get-Together. Good night.